like Jessica said, my grandfather had a picture of Richard Nixon in the bedroom where I slept when I would go to see him. And I called my grandfather Papa, and we would go down to see him in Wedowee, Alabama. When I was a kid, it was about 30 minutes from my house to his house, maybe 45. My father worked at night, so my mother and my brothers and I would go down to Wedowee, Alabama to visit my grandfather. Papa was the perfect granddaddy. He was a television salesman and a television repairman. Do you know what that means? It means he had a lot of cardboard boxes to build stuff out of. He would take and sell the televisions and bring all those cardboard boxes back to his house, and you could make forts and castles and towers and anything, and he would let you do that. The other thing that my papa was he was a wanderer. He loved to get out and travel and take his dog, usually some sort of Chihuahua or some kind of mix, and his grandson, that's me, and we would go on adventures. And this is kind of the way it would go. We would be around his house, and one of two or three things would happen. Either my grandmama would start nagging at him, and she could do that. She is a small woman, but she could nag. The other thing that could happen is just you needed something to do. You know, you needed something to do, or you was just bored. And my papa would look at me, and you got to remember, I was just a little boy, and my papa was big, and he had these black glasses and a flat top, and he wore the same thing all the time. But he would look at me in the middle of one of these situations, and he would say, "You know what we ought to do?" And I'd look back at him. I knew the answer to the question. You knew the answer, but I always said, "Well, what?" And he said, "We ought to go to Vernon." And I said, "Let's go." And you say, "Well, what's Vernon?" Well, about 4 hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours from Wedowee, Alabama, is Vernon, Florida, just across the Alabama line into Florida. My papa and I would set out to go to Vernon, Florida. Now, I'll tell you more about Vernon in just a second, but the beautiful thing about going to Vernon, Florida was not getting to Vernon, Florida, but it was the trip to Vernon, Florida. We would stop at every little roadside place, every monument, these markers, and we would read things, and my papa would know about the Indians and the rebel soldiers and the important things in life. But we would stop and we would buy hoop cheese and crackers and soda waters. Y'all know what a soda water is, don't you? It's like a knee-high or maybe a Fanta or a Mountain Dew or something like that. But Papa would let me have all the soda waters I wanted. And all the way down to Vernon, Florida, if we made it, he would be talking on his ham radio. Y'all don't remember ham radios. Before CB radios, there were ham radios. And he could talk to people all over the world, but not in his car. We would talk to people as we went along. And he, myself, and one of his little dogs would go down the road. Now, sometimes we would make it to Vernon, Florida, and sometimes we would just turn around and come home. But the thing about it was going, and once we made it, and we made it a lot of times, we would get to Vernon, my granddaddy, my papa would open the door and he'd say, "We're in Vernon now." And what you got to understand is Vernon's got about 600 people, not much else in that. Maybe a store on the side, maybe a fruit stand. Well, Papa died while I was in college, and about 40 years later, in 2011, I was at a point in my life where I needed that magic again. So I said, I hadn't been back to Vernon, Florida in 40 years. So I took it upon myself to go back to Vernon, Florida. I did, and I looked around, and I said, yeah, this is the same kind of town I remember, but I want to know more about it. I went to the post office, and the girl at the post office said, if you want to know more about Vernon, Florida, you need to go see Miss Fanaloo. And what she was saying was Fannie Lou, Miss Fanaloo. And so I made my way over to Miss Fanaloo's house. She lived there in Vernon. I waited outside for her until she got there. She opened the door and said, hey, what are you here for? I said, they said you could tell me about Vernon. And she said, well, absolutely, just come on in. And from that point, from Miss Fanaloo telling me just to come on in her house, I learned about magic eggs, and I learned about this wonderful color of pink that was in Miss Fanaloo's teapot room, where there was nothing but teapots in that room. I learned so much about Vernon, Florida. I made a good friend in Miss Fannie Lou. I actually fell in love again with Vernon, Florida, and that feeling. And I started writing about Vernon. I wrote about Miss Fanaloo, who I've been back to see many, many times. She's in a retirement home now. At this time, when she let me in her house, she was 90 years old, and she didn't know me from Adam's house cat. And she let me in there and fed me pound cake and anything else I wanted to eat. And I was there for probably, 4 hours, 6 hours. It was a wonderful thing, but I've been back to see her. I've been back to see her when she's in the retirement home. I've been back to meet so many people in Vernon. I've rewritten much of Vernon's history, including the Battle of Vernon, where this old boy was drunk and in the road, and he got shot by some Yankees. But that's the way the Yankee people wrote it. That's not what happened. So I went back and I rewrote that story like I thought it should be written. I mean, he was in the road, that's right, and he was one against many, but he was protecting his family like any daddy would do. I don't care what side you're on, but if somebody's between me, between your family, and you're going to stand up for them. So I've written about the churches, and I've written about the many, many wonderful places. There's one beautiful place they have there. It's a spring that they took me to that would remind you of a Hank Williams Jr. video. I mean, good gosh almighty. I said, what are those watermelons over there with ropes tied around them, I thought it was some kind of Yankee trap, but what it is they keep the watermelon in a cold spring and it's tied to a rope so it won't float away. But the main thing is, in 2012, after I'd written all these stories in one book about Miss Fanaloo and my experience with my papa in Vernon, Florida, they called me and said, hey, Brent, would you be the grand marshal of our Christmas parade? I got to ride on a fire truck, and it was awesome. And yeah, you say, well, there's only 600 people there. But my papa always wanted to be the mayor of Vernon. And right after getting to be the grand marshal and them bringing me in there, they gave me this certificate and this t-shirt. They made me an honorary citizen of Vernon, Florida, and it was probably the best day of my life, and I mean that with all my heart. So it was a good thing for me and a good thing for my papa, who really wanted to be mayor of Vernon. At least he told little boys that. But Vernon, Florida cranks my tractor. It always has, and it always will.